Peter the Great had looked to the West as a model for what his country should be. But even the strongest European nation could crumble. It happened in 1789 when France erupted in revolution, and Napoleon Bonaparte stepped onto the scene. He is one of the most controversial figures in the history of France. Hailed as a brilliant military leader who brought much-needed reform to the empire. Scorned as a self-obsessed despot who plundered the resources of the country for his own personal gain. Napoleon Bonaparte rode the wave of unrest after the French Revolution. He seized the reins of government in 1799 and helped implement reforms that had been started during the Revolution. Bonaparte standardized French civil law into what would become known as the Napoleonic Code. He improved the education system, made peace with the Roman Catholic Church, and founded a national bank. By 1804, Napoleon had declared himself Emperor Napoleon I. But he didn't want to rule his kingdom from high on a throne. He wanted to do it from the battlefield. The man known best as the Little General wanted military glory. Brute force had worked for Alexander the Great 2,000 years earlier, and even for Peter the Great only 100 years earlier. But in the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution started to usher in changes in everything, from the way people communicated to the way they fought wars. Changes in transportation made it easier for Napoleon to mobilize troops. He used watches and clocks to coordinate strategic events, and printing presses to copy battle plans and maps. Western powers created strong alliances and remained, for the most part, at peace.
What you get is the spread of civil society. And civil society is a constitutional government in which, if you have a king, he's still under the law rather than above the law.
Europe was changing, but Napoleon Bonaparte was still playing by the old rules. He couldn't stop waging war, and in the end, it would be his undoing.
Napoleon is unable to appreciate that the purpose of war is securing a lasting beneficial political settlement in which you get your way. All Napoleon can do is fight wars to achieve peaces, which he then breaks as quickly as possible to set out on a new set of goals. And in the end, that goes wrong. It's never enough for him.
So the European powers united against him. Prussia joined Russia, Britain, Austria, and Sweden. By 1815, Napoleon's forces were crushed, and the war was over. He was banished to an obscure rocky outcropping in the South Atlantic, where he died in 1821. Napoleon's remains languished on the island for almost 20 years. But in 1840, his coffin was relocated to one of the most prominent squares in Paris. 1 million people lined the streets to watch the glorious ceremony that marked his interment.
In the modern context, we should recognize the irony that somebody who did something like he did would be condemned by most of the world. But because he brought a certain amount of stability and an enormous amount of glory to France, which suddenly spread the tricolor all over Europe, he has this heroic stature.